Hey guys, this is my, I don't know, fifth try trying to do this video. I have a cat that likes to walk across. So if he comes back, just get ready for the cat. He's gonna have his intro. He's gonna have his time. So anyway, I just want to finish up on some of the points I left out on the last video. I sort of talked about CBD and its healing powers, but I never really correlated it to the coronavirus and why I think it'll help. I just said CBD boosts your immunity, it reduces inflammation, helps with anxiety and sleep. I also sort of touched on the history of cannabis, or I said, that'll be for another talk. So this is that talk. I'm going to talk a lot about the history of cannabis. The last thing I talked about on the video, if you didn't see it, was about buying it and looking at the milligrams that were on the bottle and sort of a price comparison. But that was about it. So this video, I'm going to touch a little more deeply, like I said, on the history of cannabis, especially how it relates to the law is the part that I think is the most interesting. And I'll also give you an explanation of what the spectrums are when you see spectrums on the bottles, if you've done that. And if you've never heard of spectrums, don't worry. This will give you'll know what it is when you see it now. And the last thing I'm going to cover is why I think CBD will help with the virus. So the history of cannabis and when it became illegal. So cannabis has been cultivated since the Stone Age. It may be the earliest non-food bearing plant that human beings ever planted. The first known reference to it as a medicinal use was in 2737 BCE in Pen Sao Ching's The Pharmacopoeia Traditional Chinese Medicine. So a long time ago. By 1000 BCE, cannabis has spread to India, the Middle East, and then to Africa. In 2737, Emperor Shenzhen made tea, and it was also found in the tomb of Ramesses in Egypt. So the span of human existence, it's not even close to being new. It's been around for a long time. But if we fast forward to the 17th to 19th century in the United States, there were actually laws requiring the growing of hemp. Hemp was considered legal tender. George Washington grew hemp on Mount Vernon. It was possible to pay your taxes with hemp in the United States. It was considered illegal not to grow hemp in the United States. In 1860, 90% of the world's paper was derived from hemp. Just a little fun fact, it takes 20 acres of trees to make the equivalent amount of paper that you can make with 1 acre of hemp. After the Civil War, it was known by doctors and soldiers as God's own medicine. So they used it as medicine to heal after the Civil War. From 1870 to 1915, the government ran on liquor tax, and we started the income tax after that. In 1914, the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act was passed. This was the first time the government attempted to regulate narcotics or doctors. Before that, there was no regulations. Doctors practiced how they wanted to practice, and people could use whatever they wanted. This law passed, even though it was widely considered unconstitutional at the time, but because they called it a tax law and not a drug regulation, it passed. Until the 1920s, there was no law against drug use. They were simply all tax laws. So it was only a tax law. You could use and do whatever you wanted. Fast forward again to 1930, the beginning of the Great Depression, the Federal Bureau of Narcotics was started and was run by director Harry Anslinger. Harry needed to justify his budget because the Great Depression was there and they were cutting federal programs. So what he did in fear of losing his job is he began to vilify cannabis to make sure that he could keep his position as director and his department intact. Harry was pretty smart. He aligned himself with a publisher named William Randolph Hearst, and Hearst had recently launched a smear campaign in the newspapers against the Mexicans and their murder weed. So there were movies such as Reefer Madness, books and ads depicted horrors that would supposedly come from smoking marijuana. Um, Anslinger would travel around the country and speak at county fairs and talk about the dangers of marijuana. So he would go to, you know, Topeka, Kansas or whatever, and he would speak at a county fair, and then Hearst would report on it and put it in the papers back in Washington and all over the country, saying that there was a speech about it, and he would propagate the story to say that there was a speech about the dangers of marijuana in Topeka, Kansas, or wherever it was. Um, it was definitely a propaganda ploy, but it worked. So at least it did for him. And in 1937, Congress passed the Marijuana Tax Act. This law just said that any person cultivating, transporting, selling, prescribing, or using marijuana had to be registered and pay a tax of $100 per ounce. That's comparable to $1,650 today. So they didn't stop you from using it, but they made the tax to use it so high that no one could afford it, and if you didn't pay the tax, then they would arrest you. So punishments for not paying the tax were $2,000, 5 years in prison, or both, and the penalties got harsher through the years. So they continued their smear campaign, and their high taxes is how they used it. So here are some of the quotes from Harry Anslinger. Marijuana, perhaps the most insidious of narcotics, is a direct byproduct of the unrestricted Mexican migration. Ooh. Marijuana causes white women to seek sexual relations with Negroes. He called marijuana the most violence-causing drug in the history of mankind. Huh. So anyway, in 1942, when the war started, all the Narcotics Act was put on pause, and the United States was at war, and they launched the Hemp for Victory campaign. And in this Hemp for Victory campaign, farmers were encouraged to grow as much hemp as possible. Some people actually I've talked to in Kentucky that pointed to a field and said, "Man, when I was a little boy," older fellows, when I was a little boy, I remember that being a big hemp field. You could smell it, and it was the government, and you know that. So I know that happened all over the country. After the war, though, it became illegal again. Then in 1962, President Kennedy fired Harry Anslinger. Throughout the 60s, the attitudes about marijuana became a lot less lenient, and a lot more lenient, I should say. And in 1969, the Marijuana Tax Act was eliminated and considered unconstitutional. Nixon was not happy because people could get arrested when they were protesting if they had a marijuana possession, but you couldn't actually arrest people for protesting. And he liked to use the marijuana possession as a reason to arrest people. So what Nixon did is he hired in 1972 the Schaefer Commission to do a study on marijuana, and he actually handpicked most of the members. The commission conducted the most comprehensive review of cannabis that had ever been produced by the federal government, even to this day. It had 73 staff members, and it worked on over 50 research projects and obtained data from scientists, doctors, law enforcement officials, public officials, community leaders, and concerned citizens. So it was a fairly comprehensive report. It was 1,184 pages long, and Nixon was not happy that the Schaefer Commission found no evidence that marijuana causes the following. Marijuana causes no physical or psychological harm. It causes no harsh withdrawal. It does not cause birth defects. It does not cause brain damage. It is not a gateway to compulsion to use hard drugs. It is there is no death resulting solely from marijuana intoxication. They found that the potential harm of getting arrested was much greater than any harm that. So they found that the harm from being arrested for having the plant was actually worse than anything that could happen to you for actually using the plant. Nixon was not happy with the Schaefer Commission. The Schaefer Commission recommended that state and federal laws be changed, and all criminal penalties for the possession of marijuana for personal use should be gotten rid of. So he didn't want to do that. So there was a recording of Nixon that was released at the time where he said that that it couldn't be correct what the Schaefer Commission came back with because there were too many Jews on the panel. So I think that's pretty hilarious. In 1970, however, the Controlled Substance Act was established. This was the first law in our history where something was put into place to control drugs directly rather than from a tax perspective. The Controlled Substance Act created 5 schedules for drugs, and these schedules were based on a drug's potential for abuse, its medical benefits, if any, and its likelihood for producing a dependence. And Nixon put marijuana on as a Schedule 1, stating that until the completion of certain studies, that's where it should be. This has never changed since Nixon, and there's never been another study, and nothing as complete as the Schaefer Commission study has ever been done since then. Cannabis was never really a problem in this country until men in power began using it as a way for their own personal gain and to control things. Even though cannabis is considered federally illegal, the U.S. government still collects taxes on it. So all of the Colorado dispensaries and Florida dispensaries and any medical dispensary, the government is still collecting their tax. So you can believe that. These businesses also pay the highest tax rate with no deductions. So anyway, that's all I'm going to say about Spectrum. There's some more stuff that went on in the 80s with the Just Say No and all of that, but I'm not going to get into that either. So now about spectrums. What does full spectrum and broad spectrum mean when you see that on a product? So full spectrum basically means that you have the whole plant. It's got THC in it. It's going to have a little CBD in it. It's going to have the terpenes. It's going to have the full benefit of the entire plant. The full benefit of what I said in the last video just briefly, the entourage effect. And the entourage effect is what happens when you have CBD, THC, all the terpenes, all the things in the plant that come together and have a medicinal property as one full plant. So with a full spectrum, because there is a trace amount of CBD, in the full spectrum, there's a trace amount of THC. Lots of people ask me, will I be positive on a test if I get drug tested at work? And what I usually say is, yeah, even though it's super, super low, if they're testing for it and they want to find it, they're probably going to find it. So, a full spectrum, if you get tested frequently at your job, might not be something that you want to take. But if they're testing for that, there's a good chance they might be testing for CBD too. I don't know. I guess it depends on the kind of job you have and what they're testing for. So anyway, the broad spectrum is different than that. Broad spectrum means they're either pulling out one or the other, basically. So broad spectrum means most of the time today when you hear somebody talk about a broad spectrum, they're talking about removing the THC so that it's just T-free or it has no THC in it. But actually, broad spectrum goes both ways. There can be a broad spectrum that, you're not going to find it in a CBD store, but there can be a broad spectrum that doesn't have CBD in it, but just has THC. And that's what broad spectrum means. Our capsules that we have, the little 1 gram capsules you'll see on the website, are a full gram of broad spectrum CBD. So they contain absolutely no THC. All right, so the last thing I wanted to cover is why I think CBD will help with the coronavirus. And it's really simple. I mean, I believe if you kind of know what kills you with the virus, it isn't the virus itself that kills you. It's the virus attacking your lungs, and your lungs and your body seeing that the cell's attacked and the cell dies, and your body has the inflammatory response, and it goes in and tries to fight the virus. And when it does, it sends mucus and pus and everything else into your lungs, and your lungs fill up with that fluid. And that fluid ultimately keeps your lungs from expanding and contracting the way that they should. So what happens is because it's so hard to do that, you burn out. You're not able to take the breath in. So because you're not breathing and you're getting tired and you're too tired to breathe, they hook you up to a ventilator, and the ventilator pushes the air in and out for you. And until you get strong enough or enough of the fluid gets out of your lungs, and you can breathe on your own, you're stuck on that ventilator. So that's why ventilators are so important right now. So the reason I believe that CBD is going to help, because CBD helps reduce inflammation. That inflammatory response and the inflammation that takes place, CBD is automatically going to reduce that. So I think that's one of the reasons that it would be good for you to have it and to continually be taking on a regular basis, besides just the fact of what it does for you in terms of boosting your immunity. But it's actually the pneumonia that kills you, the fluid that kills you. So that's why I believe that. So anyway, I'm going to conclude this with buy our products. Even if you think I'm crazy with this whole thing and you just like CBD, and you don't believe it has anything to do with the virus, our prices are crushing everyone out there. We're actually below wholesale prices on a retail level for a lot of our stuff. Go to our website, cbdcovid19.com. If you click the shop button and then go down to click on categories and click packages, you'll see a lot of our packages have things reduced even further. So anyway, not only that, our stuff is the real deal. I know you're getting good stuff. So if you watch this video and you want to give it a try, message me and I'll throw something free in there for you. Shipping is free if you do anything over $50, and 10% of all of our sales goes to the Coronavirus Relief Fund. So that's good, and you're helping yourself and you're helping the country, and I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching the video.